Good morning. Anybody on the webinar would like to test their audio, please raise your hand. Roy Miller? Roy, if you're talking, we can't hear you. It looks like you're still muted, Roy. Okay, I'll come back to you. Dan Farnham?
Yep. Good morning, Stephen. Can you hear me?
Yep, you sound good.
We're good. Great. Thank you.
Bill Hyatt?
Good morning. Coming through?
Yep, you sound good.
Excellent. Thank you.
Emerson Hasbrook?
Yeah, good morning. Sound check, please.
Yep, you sound good.
Thank you.
Okay, Roy Miller? Chris Kuhn?
Hey, good morning. Just checking audio.
Yep, you sound good.
Thanks.
Kurt Blanchard?
Good, Stephen.
You sound good.
Thank you.
Roy Miller? I'm checking to see if you can, you need to unmute to be able to speak. So Roy, I unmuted you. See if you can speak now.
All right, try me now.
Yep, sound good.
Oh, good, thank you.
Good morning again, Stephen. Can you hear me on this one, this side?
Yep, sound good, Skip.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to December council meeting. How do we sound? Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3. Yep. All right, take 2. Welcome everyone to the December council meeting. The meeting this morning is going to start for most of the day. We're going to be doing it jointly with the United States Marine Fisheries Commission. Let's get started. We have a brief news from Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully everyone's doing well. I have 2 brief announcements. First, tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, council members show up in this room for the annual council photo. So wear your holiday finest. Mary will let us know tomorrow morning where we're going to do that photo, but let's meet here in the morning at 9 o'clock for that. Also, I want to take an opportunity to introduce our newest staff member, Hayden Dubitschke, and you can talk to Hayden this week. She'll be here all week. So everybody, Hayden, everybody. Hayden is very new. She started last week. She has a bachelor's degree from Gettysburg College in Pennsylvania and a master's from Duke, from the same school that a lot of folks around this table have masters from, Nicholas School of Environmental Studies or Sciences. Hayden's going to be working on SCUP and protected resources. And again, she'll be here all week. So when you get a chance, introduce yourself to Hayden, ask her how to pronounce your last name, and that's it. So welcome, Hayden, and thank you, everyone.
Also, I'd like to recognize Sam Rouch, the Deputy Administrator for Regulatory Programs. Sam, would you like to speak anything, or are you good? Okay. All right, with that, let's get started on our first agenda item. The 2025 Summer Flounder Recreational Measures Review. The Council and Board will review previously adopted 2024-2025 recreational measures and determine whether any changes are warranted by 2025. Kylie?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. So this is our first ever interim recreational measures review for summer flounder. So as a reminder, in the fall of last year, the Council and Board set 2-year recreational measures for the first time for summer flounder, which applied to the 2024 and 2025 fishing years. So again, we'll be reviewing the previously adopted 2025 measures at this meeting. I'll go over staff, advisory panel, and monitoring committee recommendations, and the Council and Board should determine whether any changes are warranted to those previously adopted measures. So just a quick reminder of how the 2-year measures were established using the percent change approach. So the percent change approach was adopted through the harvest control rule framework and addenda in 2022, and that defines a harvest target based on 2 factors. The first is the expectation of future harvest under status quo measures. So we've been using the recreation demand model developed by the Northeast Fisheries Science Center, and that estimates expected harvest under a given set of measures, and that also includes a measure of uncertainty or confidence interval around that estimated harvest. And so that confidence interval under the percent change approach is then compared to the upcoming year's recreational harvest limit, and to determine whether that harvest limit is above or below or encompassed by that confidence interval around the estimate. The second factor that the harvest target is based on is biomass compared to the target level from the most recent stock assessment. So the percent change approach also allows measures to remain unchanged across 2 years, and that is intended to be aligned with the timing of updated assessments. This is our percent change table showing the application of the percent change approach for summer flounder for 2024 and 2025, with where we ended up in this table is highlighted in yellow here. So first, we use the recreation demand model to estimate what harvest in 2024 would have been under 2023 measures if they were left unchanged. So I'll talk about the numbers more specifically on the next slide, but we found that estimated harvest was above the 2024 and 2025 harvest limit was below the lower bound of the harvest confidence interval, meaning that if we left measures unchanged, we would likely expect an RHL overage. Summer flounder is also considered to be in the low stock size category under the percent change approach, with biomass estimated at 83% of the target. And so the combination of those factors resulted in the highlighted box in column 3 there, which was the reduction was needed equal to the difference between that harvest estimate and the harvest limit not to exceed 40%. So a bit more detail about the numbers that we used that went into the calculations. The recreation demand model estimated that harvest, if we left measures unchanged, would be 8.88 million pounds, with an 80% confidence interval around that of 8.1 to 9.5 million pounds. The 2024 and 2025 harvest limit is 6.3 million pounds. So we were expecting, if we left measures unchanged, our harvest would be pretty well over that. So in combination with the low biomass status, the required percent change was essentially equal to the difference between that median harvest estimate and the RHL needed for summer flounder. That 28% reduction was applied once by adjusting measures for 2024 with the intent to then keep measures constant across 2024 and 2025. In the interim year, the percent change approach indicates that measures will be reviewed and may be modified if new data suggest major changes in the expected impacts to the stock or the fishery. To achieve the 28% reduction, the Council and Board adopted some adjusted regional measures under a continuation of regional conservation equivalency, where harvest is controlled by state waters measures and the federal measures are waived. Under conservation equivalency, there are two sets of measures, associated measures, that the Council and Board must adopt: the non-preferred coastwide measures and the precautionary default measures. Non-preferred coastwide measures are a set of measures that would be expected to constrain harvest to the target if implemented on a coastwide basis in state and federal waters. And then the regional measures are designed to be essentially equivalent to that set of measures. Those are implemented in the federal regulations, but then they are waived in favor of the state waters measures. In 2024 and 2025, those include an 18.5-inch minimum size, a 3-fish possession limit, and a season of May 8th to September 30th. In addition, the Council and Board have to adopt precautionary default measures, and those are the deterrent measures that would be implemented in any state or region that doesn't develop adequate measures to constrain harvest to their appropriate target or follow the Board's conservation equivalency guidelines. And those precautionary default measures in 24 and 25 include a 20-inch minimum size, a 2-fish possession limit, and a season of July 1st to August 31st. So those are the measures currently in place for 2024 and 2025 associated with conservation equivalency. And then these are the current regional management measures in state waters that are effectively controlling harvest. In 2024, again, measures were adjusted to achieve that 28% reduction. So this reflects a number of changes from 2023 measures to make the measures more conservative to achieve that target. There were size limit increases in some states. You could see some more complexity introduced to some of the state regulations, such as adding split seasons with different size limits. New Jersey no longer has the slot limit. And then also note that North Carolina under fishery entirely this year due to restrictions that were necessary for the recovery of southern flounder. Recreational fishery performance for the last couple of years is shown in this table. So harvest is shown in comparison to the recreational harvest limit. And then recreational dead catch includes both harvest and dead discards, and that is compared to the recreational annual catch limit. So it's been a bit variable, but in the last couple of years, you can see that both the harvest limit and the annual catch limit have been, the harvest and catch have not quite approached those. We've been pretty well under. So a quick reminder that we've talked about this at a few recent meetings, but this is part of a general trend for summer flounder where none of the commercial ACL, the recreational ACL, or the ABC have been achieved in the last few years. However, we did have overfishing that was shown to be occurring in 2022 with the latest assessment update. So we've talked a little in more detail about that in the past, but I just wanted to do a quick reminder that this is due to the stock assessment showing that we were previously overestimating biomass and underestimating fishing mortality, possibly in part due to some life history changes that are going on with summer flounder. such as decreases in mean weight and maturity at age, and then continued below average recruitment. So we had an assessment showing that we had to take large cuts in the limits for 2024, and that's why we're in this situation where the limits are notably lower and there was a dramatic reduction needed for the recreational measures. So accountability measures can sometimes factor into the rec measures setting process. This is just to quickly note that the way we evaluate our recreational AMs is based on a 3-year moving average of dead catch to the recreational ACL. So a little bit redundant with the previous slide, but just showing that the 3-year dead catch is below that 3-year average recreational ACL. So no accountability measure has been triggered for summer flounder. So nothing additional we need to worry about there. This is a figure showing harvest and discard trends, harvest both in numbers of fish and millions of pounds. Generally, there's a trend of declining harvest since about 2013, but it's somewhat stabilized in recent years. The harvest in pounds shown in the top line last year was estimated to be 8.55 million pounds. This figure also includes the dots at the end are sort of preliminary estimates for wave 1 through 4 harvest in the current year. So that's estimated in pounds so far this year at 4.55 million pounds. And last year around the same time, our estimate was closer to 7 million pounds. So a big decrease there. Harvest in millions of fish shows a similar pattern, a bit more stable since 2010, especially in recent years. And then in 2023, about 3.16 million fish were harvested. And so far through wave 4 this year, it's estimated at 1.55 million fish. Dead discards is in the green line, and that's been slightly decreasing over the time series and relatively flat in recent years. We don't have any dead discard estimates in pounds through wave 4 this year yet. So I'm going to cover the staff recommendation and justification over the next few slides. So staff recommended no changes to the currently implemented 2025 recreational measures, including a continuation of regional conservation equivalency with the existing measures, and no changes to the non-preferred coastwide measures or precautionary default measures. Staff sees no evidence of major changes to the expected impacts of the measures on the stock or the fishery. We've previously discussed the reasoning for multi-year measures is that it's intended to promote stability and decrease some of the uncertainty associated with annual adjustments in response to variable MRIP estimates. We have no accountability measure triggered, and we do see that there seems to be a reduction in harvest in 2024, whether that's as a result of the measures being effective and or other factors. It does seem that based on this is a figure showing wave 1 through 4 harvest estimates in millions of pounds over the last several years, and there seems to be a declining trend, but it's a pretty low value relative to the rest of that series at 4.55 million pounds. So not expecting any major issues this year with harvest. It is difficult to project what the full year would be because we had such notable changes in measures between 2023 and 2024. Since 2010, waves 5 and 6 have accounted for somewhere between 6 and 20% of annual harvest. So we can do a rough approximation using that range. It might result in something like 4.82 to 5.71 million pounds of harvest, which is below the target. So that's the staff recommendation, and I'll move on to our advisory panel comments from our webinar meeting in November. We had the advisory panel meeting before the monitoring committee meeting, so these comments did feed into the monitoring committee discussion. So one advisor asked whether staff has received any information from enforcement agencies about compliance with this year's more restrictive measures, like an increase in tickets issued or and such. Staff noted we don't have any information at this time on 2024 compliance rates. And this advisor stated that compliance should be more thoroughly considered when changing the regulations, especially when measures are restricted, and that any compliance information would be useful for the advisors to review. 4 advisors spoke in favor of testing and implementing management strategies for summer flounder to reduce dead discards and increase retention opportunities. So one advisor spoke to frustration with he believes optimum yield is not being achieved given the high dead discard rates. He spoke in support of a total retention requirement, and a couple other advisors agreed with exploring total retention requirements that are based on anglers having to retain anything they catch up to a certain either total length limit or something like a total bag limit. And one advisor also spoke to the importance of summer flounder as a food fish and believed that the high discards are hindering our objectives of anglers being able to retain summer flounder for food. One advisor asked what came of the summer flounder management strategy evaluation that the council conducted a couple of years ago, and noted that it seems like the results of this have gotten a little lost. This management strategy evaluation considered strategies to reduce recreational summer flounder discards, which is essentially exactly what the other advisors were talking about and requesting. He noted that there was extensive work and stakeholder input that was put into that project, and the objectives included turning discards into landings, clearly a topic of interest. And also there was some discussion that following that MSC, there had been some consideration of expanding the modeling framework to other species and using it in the measures development process, but that seems to have lost momentum. And he wondered whether the council and board were planning to revisit the MSC results at any point. There were a couple comments and concerns expressed about the assumed dead discard mortality rate of 10% and the dead discard estimation process in general. So a few advisors questioned that 10% assumed mortality rate. One said that in his experience, it seemed about right. Several advisors talked about the studies that formed the basis for that assumption, that they are a little old at this point, and they are based on primarily net pen and tank experiments. And one advisor noted that 10% may have been more accurate in the 90s when the size of the discarded fish was smaller, and now that there are more bigger fish being released, they may have better survival rates. And he also believed there was less predation from sharks, and he believes the mortality rate is probably lower, closer to something like 4 or 5%. One advisor noted that there may be some more data available in the near future coming out of Rutgers. There is an ongoing TAG study, mostly on inshore summer flounder in warmer water conditions. And she noted there's frequent recapture of summer flounder being observed and some higher than expected survival. So she indicated there's more work needed to understand rates because it is heavily dependent on environmental conditions and how the fish are handled. And she also noted there's a grad student conducting some acoustic tagging. There was another suggestion that studies on discard mortality rates need to be conducted in an aquarium with sharks and the ability to directly observe predation. So one advisor commented with some concerns about the accuracy of the stock assessment and estimates of stock size. He noted that his trips this year were down, which is consistent with what he was seeing in other reports in New Jersey, and he expressed concern about how incorporating the revised time series of MRIP back with the 2019 stock assessment may have artificially inflated stock size. And then he expressed concern that the current investigation into further MRIP effort survey changes means that the stock size estimates could still be off. And he also questioned how the 2019 assessments resulting in notably higher commercial quotas may have had an impact on the stock. One recreational advisor from New Jersey indicated that the rec season started out good, but then upwelling conditions and bottom temperatures appeared to have a negative effect. She recommended increased consideration of how environmental conditions impact fish and suggested that these conditions are likely impacting both the distribution of the fish and their behavior, and is having an impact on the ability of anglers to catch them. Regarding the changes in stock productivity, such as the declining mean weight and maturity at age, one advisor said that it's clear we're getting smaller animals by killing the largest female fish and leaving the smaller ones to breed, and noted that management has been driving this change for many years. And then one advisor just asked whether continuing 2024 measures into 2025 meant that Virginia would keep its existing split season, and staff clarified the measures are intended to be kept exactly the same as 2024 measures in state waters. This advisor supported no changes to the measures. That concludes the advisory panel report, and the monitoring committee did not really have much to add to the staff recommendation. They agreed with the staff recommendation and rationale for no changes to the previously adopted 2025 measures. There was one comment that given the variation in performance in the last couple of years and issues with the stock assessment, it's better to be a little more conservative and keep things the same as intended. And they really made no other comments on summer flounder, so supported the staff recommendation for no change. So that's about it. The recommendation from staff and the monitoring committees, no changes to the previously adopted measures. And so the council and board just need to consider whether changes are needed. And if no changes are desired, there is no motion necessary. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie. Any discussion? Seeing nobody in the room, anybody online? Questions from the audience? Seeing Nicola?
Thank you for the presentation, Kylie. Quick question about this year's harvest. Often staff will extrapolate full year estimates using the ratio approach. Just wondering if that had been done and how it was looking in comparison to the RHL. I think our harvest estimate, with the recreation demand model being relatively new, certainly going to be interested in how it performs and looking at that in the first couple of years. Thanks.
We did a rough ballpark estimate. We didn't go through our kind of our typical process that we would use before we had the RDM, was to kind of go state by state and look at which measures were adjusted and try to account for that. Because we had so many changes to measures, and it was a review year, we didn't kind of go through that whole process, but we did look at over the years, waves 5 to 6 account for somewhere between 6 and 20% of harvest, and then kind of used that to estimate a ballpark range, which ended up being between about 4.82 to 5.71 million pounds of harvest. So it looks like it's going to be under the target. There was some conversation, I guess, later in the monitoring committee meeting about how harvest in general in 2024 for several species seems to be down. So it wasn't totally clear whether that was driven just by the measures or a combination of factors.
Thank you, and apologies for not seeing that in the presentation earlier.
Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Kylie, for the presentation. Just a quick follow-up on the comments by one of the advisors on, follow-ups to the summer flounder MSC, and I was just wondering if there had been any staff conversation about that in terms of, taking the outcome of that and thinking about some other next steps or approaches.
We've talked about it just a little bit internally, but we haven't really determined any next steps for that at this time. I think the MSC and maybe some folks more involved in the RMS action can speak to this, but it was used a little bit in sort of evaluating options for that action. But beyond that, I don't think we have any near-term plans to do anything more with that.
Any more questions, discussions? Seeing none. Kylie, thank you very much. No changes for 2025 on summer flounder. Let's move on. We're a little ahead of schedule, which is a good thing. Let's move on to the SCUP recreational measures review. And I'll give you a couple seconds to get to the microphone. The council and board will review previously adopted 2024-2025 recreational SCUP measures and determine whether any changes are warranted for 2025. And Hannah, when you get situated, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So similar to summer flounder, we will review the recreational measures for 2025 for SCUP. This presentation is very similar to the one you just saw. So just like that one, we will review the previous recommendation for 2025 recreational measures and some recent recreational fishery performance, review the staff recommendation, the advisory panel comments, and the monitoring committee recommendation, and then have a conversation and discussion to determine if changes are warranted. So Kylie already went through most of this, but just like for summer flounder, starting in 2023, SCUP recreational measures were set based on that percent change approach. So again, this approach, we start with the expectation that if we left measures unchanged, what do we think harvest would look like the next year? Through this, we also include a measure of uncertainty in the form of a confidence interval. And then we compare the measures or that measure of uncertainty to the upcoming year or year's RHL. Through this process, we also layer on additional consideration of stock biomass compared to the biomass target level from the most recent stock assessment. And the harvest target determined through this can be either greater than, less than, or even equal to the upcoming RHL. The percent change approach also allows measures to remain unchanged across multiple years, typically 2 years, which aligns with that timing of when we typically get updated stock assessments. So this table, you've seen this many times at this point, but it helps visualize the step-by-step process of the percent change approach. So last year for SCUP, we started with that same question of if we left measures unchanged in 2023, what would 2024 harvest look like? Using that recreation demand model that Kylie mentioned, to estimate harvest and the associated confidence interval, that showed that if we left measures unchanged, that would result in an RHL overage. So we landed in this bottom square here that's outlined in yellow. Then moving on to the second column, based on the most recent management track assessment, SCUP fell in this very high biomass category, again outlined in yellow. And then if we just take that over to the third column, last year we ended up in this 10% reduction. This 10% reduction was applied to the estimates that we got in that first column from the RDM, and it was expected that we would leave measures unchanged through 2025. So this table shows the numbers that went into 2024. I won't go into every piece of this, but just to highlight some of the numbers. So that RDM estimate, the median at the top, that's what the 10% reduction was applied to. And we ended up with a harvest target for 2024 of about 13.76 million pounds. So this is what federal and state measures were restricted to aim towards in 2024. And again, we had that expectation that measures would be left in 2025 and during the interim year. So this year we would review measures and modify if new data suggests any major changes is expected in the impact on the stock or the fishery. This table shows the 2024 measures in each state. So this is what measures were restricted to achieve that 10% reduction. And then also for SCUP, we have recreational accountability measures in place. Similar to last year, there was an accountability measure triggered given the most recent 3-year average of dead catch exceeded the associated 3-year average ACL. For SCUP, when this happens, we are in a situation where biomass is above the target based on the most recent stock assessment. The regulations state that adjustments to measures will be made taking into account the performance of the measures and conditions that precipitated to the overage. So in this case, the regulations don't say what we need to adjust the measures to or if we need to achieve any particular outcome. It just says that we need to adjust the measures and performance of the measures and conditions contributing to the overage should be taken into consideration. So then back in October, we also received a letter from GARFO indicating that no additional action is required in 2025 to address these recent overages. The letter noted that because that 10% reduction and the associated measures to achieve that reduction were expected to remain in place through 2025, as well as because of the most recent stock assessment showing that SCUP was not overfished nor was overfishing occurring, that no additional action would be needed. So switching gears a little bit, this table shows recent trends in recreational harvest and dead catch compared to the RHL and ACL respectively. As you can see, prior to 2020, recreational landings were consistently lower than the RHL. However, since then, recreational landings have consistently exceeded the RHL, and in some years, recreational landings have been more than double the RHL. However, in 2023, given the implementation of the percent change approach, Unlike previous years, recreational measures had the goal of achieving a harvest target of about 12.88 million pounds, which did differ from the RHL. Based on the final 2023 MRIP landings, the total recreational scup landings were about 11.91 million pounds. So we were about 7.5% less than that harvest target. But landings did slightly exceed the RHL by about 28%. However, I would like to note, if you look at previous years, in 2023, we did exceed the RHL by much less than compared to 2022, 2021, and 2020. So this figure shows annual scup harvest. As you can see, annual landings have generally increased over the past years, peaking in 2022, followed by a decline in 2023, which you saw on that last slide as well. This graph shows in black also recreational landings for just wave 1 through 4, as well as the preliminary 2024 data that we have so far. Looking at this year's preliminary wave 1 through 4 data, compared to previous years, it also looks like we saw another decline and just a slight decline compared to 2023 specifically. These recent declines could partially be attributed to the restrictions implemented in 2023 as well as again last year. And focusing a little bit more on wave 1 through 4 landings throughout the time series, you can see that wave 1 through 4 landings compared to total annual estimates does fluctuate from year to year, accounting from anywhere from 68 to 82% of total harvest, but it does typically account for the bulk of annual harvest. So lastly, if we look at preliminary wave 1 through 4 data compared to previous year's wave 5 through 6 data, so similar to what Kylie showed, we can get a ballpark estimate of what annual 2024 estimates might be. However, before I step through this process, I would like to preface that this is generally difficult to get a more definitive answer just using annual MRIP estimates. So this is a very ballpark estimate, and given, the fluctuating measures we've seen from year to year, this is kind of take with a grain of salt. So if we look just at wave 5 through 6 over the past 10 years, so focusing on 2014 through 2023, as shown in the shaded gray area, over the past 10 years, wave 5 through 6 harvest ranged anywhere from 18 to 44% of total harvest. And then if we apply that to the wave 1 through 4 2024 estimates and assume that we see a similar trend this year, 2024 annual estimates could range anywhere from 10.78 to 13.14 million pounds, indicated by those blue stars. So that is that lower than that harvest target I mentioned on an earlier slide, which was about 13.76 million pounds as a reminder. So similar to summer flounder, there are a few things to consider for reviewing 2025 recreational measures. First, the intent of the percent change approach is to leave recreational measures unchanged over 2 years, unless there is a major change in the expected impacts of the measures on the stock or the fishery. For scup, it does not appear, there does not appear to be any evidence of a major change. Additionally, the intent of developing multiple years measures is to promote stability in the fishery, as well as to help reduce management uncertainty linked to the frequent adjustments. Scup measures were also restricted in 2023 and again in 2024, which both seem to be having some sort of impact on overall harvest. And then lastly, based on that previous slide I showed, projected annual harvest in 2024 is looking like it could be less than that 2024 harvest target. So for all these reasons, staff recommends no change to the current 2025 measures. So this would maintain status quo measures in state waters represented by the table. There's a much larger table on a previous slide, and then status quo federal measures listed on the right. So we held an advisory panel meeting back in November. At the advisory panel meeting, a few advisors provided feedback on staff recommendation, but of those that did, they supported status quo measures. During the meeting, multiple of these advisors agreed that the current regulations are sufficient for SCUP. One advisor did note the abundance of SCUP in southern New Jersey and that the stock appears to be shifting south. This advisor suggested that fisheries management should account for such anomalies when assessing climate impacts, while another advisor raised concern about SCUP management not being aligned with the market demand and that current management perceives to favor tilapia in the marketplace. This advisor questioned why the size limit conflicts with consumer preference of whole pan-fried SCUP and recommended using a total cumulative length retention limit for SCUP instead of the traditional size limits. The advisor also noted that a total cumulative length retention limit would also result in full retention and therefore eliminate dead discards. So during the recent monitoring committee meeting, the monitoring committee was also supportive of staff recommendation for status quo, as well as the provided rationale outlined on slide 15, and ultimately recommended no change to the previously adopted 2025 measures. So just to summarize, the recommendation here is for no change in to the previously adopted 2025 measures, and similar to summer flounder, if the council and board choose to adopt no change, we would not need a motion here today. With that, that concludes the presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Hannah, for the presentation. Any questions, discussion? John Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Hannah. Just curious about that comment about tilapia. What was the advisor's point there, that SCUP are competing with tilapia?
Yeah, this advisor has mentioned this multiple times, that tilapia is a relatively inexpensive protein source, and it seems to be a similar, desired protein source as SCUP, similar tasting. And so because it is cheaper than SCUP, the marketplace or the consumers are the ones that are preferring just buying tilapia over SCUP, and that our management is not helping in that in any way.
Eric Reed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, there's more to it than just that. I mean, tilapia is essentially an imported farm-raised fish, and the price stability in the market goes on for years. I mean, you want to lock into a price today for next year, you can do that. As far as the management of SCUP goes, we all know the possession limits go up and down at different times of year, and that does not promote stability in the market. So that's another key component there. So that's my 2 cents on tilapia marketing. Thank you.
Chris Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a comment from an advisor from New Jersey who said something about, finding more SCUP in New Jersey than usual, and referenced, potential climate change. So what was that about? And more importantly, is there any indication from any of the surveys that we're seeing more SCUP further south than normal?
So that advisor noted that he's seeing SCUP also further south. And so he thinks that this is an anomaly that, we're not seeing in our other fisheries. And so when we think about management decisions, we should be taking that into consideration. I haven't looked at the most recent year's survey information, but based on last year's, I also like to preface that the survey goes to the same point geographically each year. There doesn't seem to be more in that North Carolina, Virginia area compared to previous years, but they are found there. I'm not sure about further south to there, since our survey doesn't go beyond that point. We'd have to look at South Atlantic information, but I don't know that their trap survey really catches SCUP.
Any more discussion around the table? Anyone online? Skip Feller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add, we see a handful of SCUP every year, but I would not say that we see any more recently. It's, I wouldn't say it's in the single digits that we see every year.
James Fletcher.
The discussion, I'm glad to hear you have it on tilapia versus SCUP. the council in the last 10 years has basically, and nor intentionally, in my opinion, United National Fishermen speaking, has intentionally given the market to scup, to tilapia. But when you go as a low-income person, and this is what the people sitting around that council do not realize, you don't buy a number of pounds of fish for a family of 5. You buy 5 fish. And in flounders and everything else, you have missed the point of taking the fish away from the low income. And the point of bringing up scup versus tilapia is to try to get management to realize that the smaller fish, there's the greatest number of those in the ocean. As you go up in scale, the fish number declines. So the point of would be better off to harvest smaller fish and feed the population rather than harvesting larger fish, thereby decrease the size through genetics. United National Fishermen has been in this since the 70s when I started in fisheries management. And it is time that we realize and admit that a mistake has been made in telling management to harvest the largest fish and leave the smallest. And getting back to the point, if we could harvest the smaller scup, put them in the market, and put them in the smaller the fish, the cheaper the price. We can put small scup in the market cheaper than they can raise tilapia. But I appreciate it greatly that at least discussion is coming in of maybe the whole thing that these bright scientists have told us of killing the large reproductive females and leaving the slower growing fish may, quote, may be wrong. But on scup, if you would let the industry harvest the smaller fish and put them in the market at a price cheaper than tilapia, we could take that back. And I thank you for your time. James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association.
Any questions or comments from the audience? Greg?
Greg DiDomenico, Luntz Fisheries. Mr. Chairman, if I can I just ask staff a few questions?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Hey, Anna, how are you? Could you tell me what the RHL is and what the RHT is for 2023 or 2024?
Yes, so 2023, the RHL is was 9.27 million pounds. The recreational harvest target, which I think is what you mean by RHT, was 12.88 million pounds. In 2024, in 2024, the RHL is 13.18 million pounds. The recreational harvest target is 13.76 million pounds, and then the 2025 RHL is 12.31 million. 12.31 million pounds, and the harvest target is the same, so that 13.76 million pounds.
How do you calculate the value, the difference in the two values?
The
RHL and the RHT.
So that's calculated through the recreation demand model. So basically we put in the most recent MRIP numbers and the model runs and it spits out that estimate. And then we go through the percent change approach, and last year it required a 10% reduction. So that first estimate, 10% is reduced from that, and that gets to the harvest target. So let me show this table. So right here. So in 2024, that median estimate from the recreation demand model was at 15.29 million pounds. So that was what estimated harvest would be if measures remained unchanged. So 2023 measures remained unchanged. We went through that table, we got 10% reduction required. 10% is reduced from that to get that 13.76 million pounds.
Anything else around the table? Seeing none, Hannah, thank you very much. And the SCUP for 2025 will remain the same as 2024. We're way ahead of schedule. But since we've been discussing around the table here up front that since CBAS is going to be an action item, we don't want to get into it until 1 o'clock when it's scheduled. So we're going to take a super long lunch and everybody be here straight and ready to roll at 1 o'clock. Thank you.